Bronwyn, can you start from your side? My button is not activated.
Yeah, Prof is on.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to today's session. Today, we're going to be looking at grant writing. So this is a three-part session, if you will. So today, we're going to do the first session, and then we're also going to have follow-up sessions as well, where we're going to continue on various aspects of grant writing. I'm going to share my screen so that we can be able to Okay, so I know that perhaps for some of you, you are not thinking about applying for grants at the moment. However, it is very important to already start thinking about what is applying for a grant or what is involved in applying for a grant. Why are grants important? So for those of you who are already in academia as emerging scholars, for those of you who are interested in exploring your future in academia, and for those of you who are also thinking of applying for other forms of funding, these sessions will be important in assisting you to know and to understand all the different processes that are involved when one applies for a grant. So you can even think about when you're applying for a bursary, when you're applying for a scholarship, when you're applying for a fellowship. So the whole umbrella idea around what are some of the critical things or critical issues that you need to think about when you are applying for funding would be covered in these sessions around grant writing. And you will see as we move into the various processes, the connections and the links between what you need to think about when you are applying for a grant vis-a-vis what you need to think about when you are, for example, writing for publication. So the recent sessions that we've just had around writing for publication, but also even when you're writing your own thesis or dissertation. So some of the rules in terms of things to consider, some of the rules in terms of what are the things that editors are looking for, what we were talking about in publications. What is it that examiners are looking for when you finally submit your thesis or dissertation for examination? I want you to keep that in mind also when we are talking about grant writing. What is it that the funders are looking for? What is it that the reviewers are looking for? And you'll see as we go along some of the linkages or similarities in terms of these processes. So it's important that you understand the core in terms of what is entailed when one applies for something, or when you put together a proposal, be it a research proposal, a grant writing proposal, or an article for some editor to consider for publication. What are some of the steps that one should think about? Okay, so when you are developing a research project grant proposal, what are some of the things that one needs to keep in mind to make sure that your proposal is successful? And remember here, just like with publication where you submit, but there's 100 or 200 other people also submitting their manuscript for consideration for that journal, you have to make sure everything is in place. The same rules apply here as well. When you are applying for funding, it's important to also note that chances are there are many other people who are also applying for funding. So what is it that's going to make your proposal stand out? What is it that's going to make the funder be willing to give you R1 million, right? To be willing to give you 5 million rand. What is it that you're bringing? that they look at and they see the importance of, and they entrust you with their funding to ensure that you work on the project that you are proposing. So before you can even start working on a proposal, maybe you have an idea, maybe you've got research that you've been working on or research that you would like to work on. Often you will see either on the internet or in your institution or being shared by your supervisors, there are what we call grant announcements, right? So grant announcements are important because they let you know about grant funding that is available for a specific program competition. There are many, many grants that are available, but grants are always very particular and very specific in terms of the kind of attention that they require the researcher to focus on for their money. So people have got different priorities. They've got different themes that they would like researchers to focus on. And you have to make sure that when you apply or when you see these announcements, that you check first whether your work is aligned to the grant announcement, right? It's also it's also considered sometimes when we get the invitation or an email, it would be called notice inviting applicants. So applicants are invited to apply for this funding, right? So you read and you check what the funding is about, and then you determine whether that funding is for you or not. So you're not just going to apply for funding for the sake of applying for funding. You're not going to apply because there happens to be a notice saying people can apply for funding. You need to be able to check, is your work aligned to the call? Is your work in line with what the funder wants or what they are looking for? Sometimes what tends to happen is that people would twist and tweak and revise and change their work so that it fits the grant application. Colleagues, remember, if you're going to be applying for funding and you are given $1 million, 3 million, 5 million, most of these grants are for an extended period. It's going to be for 3 years, it's going to be for 5 years. Do you see yourself working on that project with passion for the next 3 years or the next 5 years? So what I would like really to caution you against is applying for funding because that's the funding that's available. And then you end up doing research or you work on a project that is not really aligned to your research interest, or that is not really aligned to what you're passionate about in terms of the work that you're doing, right? So that's also very, very important because it will show itself or come through in how you actually execute the work after you've received the funding. It's really going to feel like a lot of work. It's going to feel like a chore because your whole heart would not be in it. So just really take that into consideration when you are considering applying for grants, specifically for grants. I think when it comes to bursaries or your scholarships, there tends to be maybe more of a leeway because you already have a proposal or a topic that you're working on and you just need funding to support your studies. But going beyond that, it's very important to really think about the kind of research that you want to do and the assistance that you would require for you to be able to execute the work. Where are some of the grants or the announcement? And this is where you need to be proactive. You need to be proactive and not just rely on UNISA bursary, for example. What are some of the other platforms or places where you can apply for funding to assist you to be able to do your research so that you can complete your qualification? So here it's just a list, and because you'll have access to the slides, you can be able to click and go and have a look at some of these grants and look at what they are looking for and how they have structured their calls, just to already start to get thinking about what does it mean to apply for a grant? What are the expectations? And what is the structure of the calls? What is it that one needs to keep in mind when you're applying for grants? Okay, so yes, as I've indicated, this is just an example of some of the grant opportunities that are there that you can always just go and have a look at. The USAID is a common one that I think many people would know of or would be aware of. And then when it comes to grants, as I've indicated, many of the funders have priorities. So when a foundation, a funder decides that they have 10 million that they would like to give out as a grant, they usually do this also with certain priorities in mind. Right? So, you know, when you apply for MasterCard Foundation, or when you apply for the Ford Foundation, or when you apply for Melinda and Bill Gates funding, there's certain priorities that all the different funders would have. So you need to look at the different calls, the different grant applications, and say which one is linked to or resonates with the kind of research that I'm doing. And what are these funding priorities used for? They're used to communicate the required content focus of an application. So already when you look at the application, you know what the priority of the funder is. And from the onset, you can be able to say, oh, okay, this is applicable to me, or it's not applicable to me. So you don't waste your own time and you don't waste the funder's time. You just apply for the sake of applying because there's a call. You check what are their priorities. So what are the themes or a theme that they are interested in, that they're interested in funding? And if it's aligned to your own interests, then you can consider working on an application. These are very critical things to think about from the onset. And these priorities are used to give a priority, as I've indicated, or identify the department or the funder's interest in a specific issue. So maybe a particular funder is interested in issues of gender equality. So they would say, okay, we're offering 3 million to work or to scholars or to research that focuses on gender equality. And under gender equality, these are the sub-themes that we will consider. Right? And then they will indicate there, maybe sexual violence, domestic violence, gender equity in the workplace. So all these different sub-themes are what we would consider to fund if someone is doing work in this area. So you read that and you check. So it's usually quite broad. Some are very, very specific, but some are broad. So they'll say gender equality, and then under gender equality, these are the specific issues or focus areas that we would like the researcher to focus on when they're doing their research. So that already gives you a very clear indication in terms of what this funder's priority is. They want to ensure that there's work that's done on gender inequities because they're interested in gender equality. So they would like their money to be used towards work that's going to lead towards the promotion of gender equality, the understanding of it, policy issues, and maybe even practical steps in terms of what can be done. So they give you money to be able to do that. Okay. It could also be target population. So maybe working with young people or vulnerable population as described by them. So these are the specific things that you would look for or look at. Also in terms of location and context, what is it that they're specifically looking at? And then you look at where you are located and then say, okay, would this be applicable to me or not? So this assists the funder to be able to have focus, but it also assists you as the researcher to be able to say, okay, this competition is for me, funding competition is for me or not. am I going to apply or not? And they also indicate they will be giving maybe 2 grants or 5 grants or 10 grants. And then you also have an idea in terms of possible chances of receiving funding. And then following the criteria, we also have the priorities. We also have the selection criteria, right? Selection criteria are used by you. They assist you to be able to know how to tell your story, to be able to know what to focus on, what to zoom in on, how to, in inverted commas, sell your project in a way that's going to lend itself to reviewers looking at your work positively. So you need to familiarize yourself with the selection criteria. So what is the criteria that the funder uses? So what are the things that they look at that determines what is a strong application and what is a weak application, right? So it's you as the applicant. And knowing this criteria assists you so that as you work on your proposal, you know how to frame it in a way that shows all these various strengths of the work that you want to do. But also the selection criteria is used by the funder to guide the reviewers and say, okay, reviewers, as you review these applications, these are the things that we would like you to have a look at. What's important to us is this and that, and that. These are the 5 important things. But of these 5 important things, this is how we're going to score them. So this one carries more weight, and this one then follows, and that one then follows. So there's a hierarchy in terms of the different aspects or parts of the application that one needs to give attention to. So as the reviewers score your application, they'll be using this criteria to be able to determine that. Okay, and so here are some points, examples of what goes into selection criteria. And so as you are thinking or planning to apply for a grant in future, or maybe you are working and have been thinking about applying for a grant, then these are some of the criteria that many funders use when it comes to grant applications. So first, and you'll see in terms of the point range gives you an indication of the importance, right, in terms of the hierarchy of what needs to be focused on, because that's where the highest points or scoring would go towards. So the quality of the project design, right? So this is now the overall application, the excellence of how well the proposed project is developed, right? So think of your own research proposal, for example. Do things follow logically? Is it very clear what the problem is here? Is it clear what the aim of the project is? Is it clear what the methodology that you're going to be using is? Is it clear how you're going to then analyze and then evaluate the work that you're doing? Is it clear what it is that you're hoping or anticipating to get at the end of the project? So the overall project development is very critical. So the quality of all of it is very critical. So you'll see there, it gets ranked 30 to 50 in terms of the score that gets given to the quality of the project. And here again, as I was saying at the beginning, that as I'm talking, I would like you to think about your publication, for example, or to think about your own chapters or the proposal that you're working on. That one of the things that I've learned over time is examiners are interested in the content and the scientific nature and the contribution of your work, but they're also interested in the structure and the attention that you pay into how you've developed your argument, you've developed your whole project from chapter 1 to the last chapter. And sometimes that can be a determinant of whether you're just going to pass or you're going to pass with a distinction. Maybe you did brilliant work, but the work was clumsy. And this is why we really insist on proofreading and professional editing, because you should not get your distinction because there were grammatical things and your work seems sloppy when it doesn't have to, right? So the quality of the project is very important. And then the quality of the project evaluation. How are you going to evaluate the work that you're doing? How are you going to determine at the end and say, okay, I will know that this is successful if 1, 2, and 3 happens, right? So the quality of the evaluation that will be conducted of the proposed project. So when you're applying for a grant, it's not just to say, I'm going to conduct this work, this is how I'm going to do it, and at the end, this is what I'm hoping to achieve. The idea is to say what happens also beyond that. The grants are often long-term. So at the end, what is it that you're hoping to see, and how are you going to, what tools or processes you're going to put in place to make sure or to try and assist us to say, okay, here are some improvements. So what kind of evaluation techniques are you going to put in place? You're doing work on gender inequality in the workplace, and you're looking specifically at harassment, maybe sexual harassment. How does that show itself in the workplace? And you're doing work trying to understand this, trying to check the prevalence of this. And then at the end, you want to develop a model, you want to assist the institution or that workplace to come up with a toolkit, a framework, something that they can put in place. And so you go beyond that and say, okay, when that has been in place, these are some of the strategies that can be used to evaluate and check whether there has been a decrease maybe in sexual harassment or sexual harassment cases within that particular workplace. Because at the end of the day, you want to do work that's going to bring about change and practical change in this case. Some funders are not as specific in that sense in terms of wanting to see this at the end of a time, but that is implied in the work that you're doing. As much as when you're doing your research right now, the idea is that at the end, you want to offer us a renewed understanding or offer us a framework of how we can understand, attend to, apply, or rethink a particular phenomena that you focused on in your research, right? And then is there a need? Is there a need for this project, right? So this then obviously means as you work on your project design, you work on your proposal, you would have done your homework. You would have checked how prevalent, how big of an issue is sexual harassment in the workplace. Is there a need for this project to assist us to understand and to come up with strategies to reduce the level of sexual harassment in the workplace? So there's a need for this project, and you need to be able to justify and show why there's a need. You know, statistics show that in the last 3 years, there's been an increase. Statistics show that there's lack of productivity as people are absent from work because of some of the challenges in the workplace linked to sexual harassment. There have been so many cases and so many reports in many of the workplaces. And as a result, it's important for us to pay attention and say, what is going on? And this is how you're going to approach this. And this is what you're hoping to achieve, right? So is there a need for the project? So this has to be very clear in the application that you're going to put together. And then this is linked again to the significance, right? The importance of this problem or issues that are to be addressed. The importance, and we can say it goes without saying that sexual harassment is an issue. We can say it goes without saying that we do need to give attention to it because it is a problem in the workplace, because it affects the workforce in multiple ways, right? It's about loss of revenue, productivity, it's about mental health, it's about job satisfaction. So what is the significance, right, of this work? And then you'll see the range in terms of the points that are given to all of this. And there's quite a number of them. And here I'm giving you an exhaustive list, but you may find that as you apply for a grant, there are certain funders that would pay more attention to 3 of these or 5 of these or 6 of this. But it's important to know there's a whole variety of criteria so that as you apply for a grant, you have a good understanding in terms of what is it that the funders are looking for. And then the quality of the management plan. So we say the project is going to be 3 years. The project is going to be 5 years. So what is it that you're going to be doing for the 5 years? You're starting now in October 2023, and then going on all the way for 5 years, maybe until 2028, October. And for each and every month or quarter or year, you need to be able to say, this is what you're going to be focusing on from the initial phase all the way to the 5th year to the end. So the management plan, does it make sense, right? The quality of the plan that you put forward in terms of how you're going to manage the project, what's going to be in place, who's going to be involved, and what is the role of each of the people that are going to be involved. The services that you're going to be doing or needing, quality of the services to be provided by the proposed project. What is it that this project is aiming to achieve or to do or to contribute, right? You want to come up with a toolkit. You want to come up with a framework that involves number 1, 2, 3, and 4. So what is it? What are the practical things, if you will, that you are thinking about and considering that you anticipate to be the output of this project that you're working on? And then for many of the grants, you need to be working as a team. And if you're working for as a team, who is going to be part of that team? And how were the team members selected? What is the composition of the team? So the quality of the personnel that will carry out the proposed project. Are you going to work with researchers, research assistants? Are you going to collaborate with other people in other institutions? Are you going to collaborate with other people in institutions within your country or outside of your country? And why is that? Why have you chosen to work with this person? What is it that they are going to contribute to the project? So that also contributes in terms of saying this is very well thought out. And if I look at the personnel, the PI, the principal investigator, and then maybe the 3 team members, and then the students, and then maybe there's capacity building there as well. How have you thought about all these different layers when it comes to personnel? Is there admin assistance that is required as well? What specifically is going to be required? You'll see that the points are not very high here. It's between 5 and 10 marks, if you will, the rating, but it's also an integral part of what you need to think about as you are applying for a grant. And then the adequacy of resources. Here you need to demonstrate that resources are sufficient to carry out the project. If your resources are going to be solely from the funder, you need to also, again, and here we're talking again about budgeting, which we will give specific attention to later. But the adequacy of the resources, if you're going to ask for 3 million rand, is the 3 million rand sufficient for your work? Have you thought about the whole project in line with the money that is available, and then being practical? understanding that as you plan for 2023, the costs and amounts of things are not going to be necessarily the same in 2024, let alone 2028. So you also need to take that into account in your budgeting when you're thinking about the resources. So again, if you under budget or you don't do your homework in terms of what is the hourly rate for a research assistant, for example. So you don't just thumbsuck them and say, okay, no, we'll give them 1,000 rand per hour, or we'll give them 600 rand per hour. How many hours are they going to work per week, per month, per year? Are you only going to need them for just the first year? In the second year, maybe not. Or you're going to need them in the second year when you've done the initial work and you need them to assist with the second phase of the project. So how are you framing your project in a way that it's very clear that the allocation of resources, the use of resources are very well thought out? So each and every step when it comes to criteria has to be well thought out. And you cannot just give attention to one part and not give attention to the other part. Here is just a summary of what I've just said in terms of the selection criteria in many of the application packages. The need, is there a need for this? Is it important? Is it part of maybe the SDGs? Is it part of the national imperative? What is the national imperative in South Africa or a country where maybe some of you are based right now? So the need is very important. Significance of the work is important. And then the project design, as I've indicated, adequacy of resources, management plan, and then the evaluation of the project. And then the second pie also shows you a different way in which maybe other funders can have a look at it. So all of these are important, but in terms of how then the criteria would be set out and the allocation of rankings of the different aspects of the criteria can also differ from one funder to the next, right? So it depends on what it is that they're prioritizing, what is it that they think is critical for them. So here you'll see, again, significance. Project design continues to be very important. So there's more or less a balance sheet here in terms of the need, significance, project design, and evaluation. Whereas with the first one, you'll see in terms of the rankings that project design is given more value than all the other criteria. So as you look at the call for a grant, and as you look at the requirements, these are the things that you need to keep in mind so that it helps you as you work on your proposal to know also how to frame your proposal based on the criteria that you know the reviewers are going to be using. The call might not necessarily say, this is what the reviewers will be looking at, but use criteria as a guide, because that criteria is the one that the reviewers are going to use. So they'll say, no, criteria, you need to focus on this and that and that and that. So you use that as a guide to say, okay, this is somewhat of a scoring card that is most likely going to be used by the reviewers as they look at my application. Okay, so as you work on your application, again, here we're still focusing just on the overview of thinking about applying for a grant before we look at the finer details of what the grant entails, right? The specific aspects of the grant. So we're talking about the planning, the thinking around applying for a grant. So most important, I think, like everything else really, make sure that you give yourself plenty of time to prepare. Because many, if not all, I've not come across a grant application that didn't take me forever to complete. And the nice thing now is with grant applications that are online, there is an opportunity for you to actually work over it, to work on it over an extended period of time. So you go online, you start the application, you start filling in what you can, and then you save, and then you come back to it tomorrow or after a few days or the following week. Start as early as possible so that you're not rushed. Believe me when I tell you that rushed work can be seen. If I'm a reviewer, I can see that this work was rushed. It's like when you submit an article to a journal, look at it as a reviewer, and then you can see, and most of the time you'll see the reviewer will say, it looks like this article was submitted prematurely. Or I wonder whether this was still a working draft, and maybe the author submitted a wrong draft. And by that time, that's actually your final draft. But rushed work can be seen, right? So don't lose on the potential to receive a grant that can assist you to do your work because you did rush job. If you've made the decision that, okay, I would like to apply for a grant, make sure that you dedicate time to working on the application, to understanding the call, and to giving yourself time to work on the application and submit. Many of the grant applications take about 25 to 40 hours. Okay, so you need to dedicate that, right? So say it's going to take me roughly 2 days or just under 2 days to work on an application for a grant, because you really need to apply yourself. You really need to apply yourself. Understand what it is that they're looking for. This means you read the application package in its entirety. And I know that sometimes it can be a lot of text, it can be a lot of information. But if you don't read it carefully, then you might miss out on some important points or important criteria because you did not read everything. Again, this goes with making sure that you give yourself time. Read everything, make sure you understand everything. If you have questions, contact the competition manager or refer to the application package. All the time, in all their calls, there's always a contact person. If you have questions, contact this, send us an email. Make sure that if you are uncertain, instead of submitting something that is incorrect or maybe you misunderstood something, make sure that as you go through this process, if anything is unclear, write an email and just ask. There's no question that's stupid. You might lose out because you were afraid to ask. So ask. So as I've indicated, the competition manager, the person that you would send an email queries to, and this is usually someone who is overseeing the application process, receiving all the applications and sorting things out, and also checking whether everything is in place. This is the person who will respond to all the inquiries that you might have pertaining to the grant application. Okay, so they oversee everything until the grant has been awarded to the recipient. So this person is very critical and helpful because they know what it is that is required, and they're there to answer your question or questions should you have any. Okay. Again, just in summary, follow the suggested formatting guidelines. Does this ring a bell? Remember when we were talking about writing for publication? The importance of making sure that you understand author guidelines as you prepare your manuscript before you submit it to a journal. The same here. Follow the suggested formatting guidelines. If they say you need to write a motivation, it has to be 500 words. Don't write a motivation that's 1,300 words. If they want additional documents, make sure that you submit everything. So follow the suggested formatting guidelines. Format it the way that they say that you should, because it makes life easier for them. Because like I said, they receive many applications. So don't make life easy for them in terms of quick rejection, because it just means, oh, one less application to worry about. This one did not read the guidelines. Okay, let's just throw it out. You don't want that. Structure your narrative according to the selection criteria and make it easy for peer reviewers to evaluate your proposal. If they say you must provide a narrative, and in this narrative, give us a little bit of background in terms of your work, in terms of your achievements, in terms of your the things that you've done already. So many funders would want a bit of background about yourself, but they would also be very specific in terms of what it is that they would like to know about you, right? I can give an example of one of the applications that once reviewed, and there they asked the applicants to provide personal profile. So provide one page, right? Give us one page where you give us your personal profile. You need to understand you are applying for a research grant. You are applying for recognition in the research arena. So if I say to you, your personal profile, this needs to be something that's related to research, that's related to your research. So your personal profile, you can say you graduated with this qualification in this year, and as you were graduating or as a student, you got this award and that award or that recognition, and you at this time have had the opportunity to attend 3 conferences where you published your work. You've got one work that's published, or where you presented your work in conferences, I beg your pardon. And then you've had a paper published or a paper submitted, and you've done, so it's a personal profile about yourself as a researcher, as a scholar. And here I receive an application, and the applicant is telling us that, no, I grew up in a little village in this place, and there I went to primary school at this place, and then upon growing up, I went to this high school, and then I went to university, and my family, there's 5 of us, and this and that. So think about that and say, how is this going to assist me as a reviewer to get an understanding of who you are as a scholar? So understand also the context, understand what the application is about, and think about what is it that you're sharing and how what you're sharing is going to assist the one who's reviewing you to get a glimpse of your work, your history in terms of your journey in research, and again, offering the reviewer the potential to get a sense of what you have done, right? So maybe you're still busy with your PhD, but here you are telling me that you've already attended 3 conferences, that you've got a paper published already, and that you are part of a collaborative project, maybe with your supervisor or colleagues in another place. Already that tells me that you're an active scholar. It already tells me that you are someone who's curious, who's interested to broaden the horizon when it comes to knowledge production, but also the research area arena. Vis-a-vis someone who will write, but they don't have all this information or all this experience in terms of being a scholar and propelling themselves and understanding the academic space or the research space. So if that's what you're going to write vis-a-vis someone who's not going to provide, who's never been to a conference, who's never published, who's never really been engaged in any academic citizenship, what are the chances, right, that the other person would be considered over this one who's got? And with this, I would like to encourage you, whenever there's an opportunity for you to be involved within academic spaces, if there's a conference, and now it's even much easier. It's really easier, and we don't really have excuses, because before COVID, for example, many of the conferences were only in person. And that meant a lot of money in terms of paying for registration fees and travel and all of that. But many of the engagements these days are online, and that offers you the opportunity to be part of the academic community by attending, presenting, and participating in these spaces, because that's something that you can draw on as you provide your personal narrative when you apply for funding, or even when you apply for academic jobs in future. Always think about what is it that you can do, not only to build yourself and equip yourself as a scholar, but to also give you that edge when it comes to applying for things and being able to add all this experience to the application that you're going to be submitting. The language that you use, be clear. Don't be ambiguous. Don't use jargon where it's not necessary, and be concise. Don't go on and on and on and on. And that's why in many of the applications, there's a word limit. So it requires you to really sit and think and be very strategic in deciding what is it that you want to include and what is it that is not necessary to include. The word count forces you to be able to provide a narrative that is clear, that is concise, but that's attending to the core of what the issue that you want to communicate is. Okay, so be very specific. Don't, like I've said, don't be ambiguous and leave me as your reviewer trying to figure out, could you be meaning this, or did you perhaps mean that? So now I have to decipher this, and I have to decide for myself. And me deciding for myself might not be perhaps what you had in mind. But if your work is clear, then I don't need to be worrying about trying to make sense of what maybe you were trying to say, right? It's not the time or space to be saying what I'm trying to say is, right? You need to just say it, and say it very clear and very specific. Justify the request. The fact that the funding is for 3 million doesn't mean you have to request or your budget has to be 3 million to the T. It could be 2,700,000, right? It could be 1,900,000. But it's very clear what it is that you want, what you're looking for, and then your budgeting is aligned to everything that you've put forward. It might be good because you are assisting the funder maybe to fund someone else or another project, right? But it's not just for the sake of the money and saying, oh, here's the money, we can fund another project. It's also saying, but is it doable? Is it realistic that this person is asking for 1.8, but they want to do all these 15 things? Is that feasible? So the budgeting is also very, very important. And that's why we're going to give it its own attention in the upcoming sessions. So justify your funding request according to the project activities and check all budget figures. Keep in mind that cost must be both reasonable and necessary. Like I said, you're not just going to ask for money for the sake of it. It must be reasonable. It must be clear how you came to that number. So again, here, you need to do your homework. If you work on your application at the last minute, you're not going to be able to do your proper homework, right? And is it necessary to have this item on your budget? Think about it very clearly. And then, as I always say, proofread your work. You don't want to lose out on your work being approved, being considered because of sloppiness in your work, okay? Please, if there's anything that you remember from the things that I say, that should be one of the main things that you remember. And this is applicable to all the other aspects of your academic journey. And then submitting your proposal. I've already said, don't wait until the last minute to submit your application. This is where sloppiness comes in, because you're in a rush. They said by 12 p.m. on the 22nd, it must be in. And tonight, you spend sleepless nights, you are very tired, you're exhausted, you're working on this. when are you going to get time to proofread? By the time you're done in the middle of the night, you're very exhausted. But also the fact that you're working on this in the middle of the night means that you might not pay attention to it as you should, because yes, many of us do work at night, but are you really alert in the way that you should at that time to be able to work on something as important as applying for a grant for 5 million rand, right? If you're submitting an e-application, know the specific deadline, date, and time. So sometimes it can be on the 22nd, which is tomorrow, but it can be on the 22nd, 10 a.m. Can be on the 22nd, 12 p.m. It can be 12 a.m. So you also need to look at the date, because if it's 1 minute after 12, then the system closes, especially if it's an online application. If the time, because it's set, the system is set so that when it hits 12 on the dot, the system automatically closes. So you trying to finalize and just hoping that by 12 you'll submit, it's not going to accept it. You will see that it will say, this call is closed, applications are closed. And you don't want that, because you would have spent this time working on this and now you can submit it. Okay. Have a fresh pair of eyes. Again, this can only happen if you've given yourself time. You finished well in advance, and now you can give someone else to read your proposal, and they can tell you, okay, this is clear, this is not clear. What are you trying to say here? Maybe say this differently. So it assists you in terms of strengthening your application. Again, that can only happen if you don't wait until the last minute. Make certain that all the forms and signatures are included in your application, especially if you are attached to the university and you are applying for this funding in your capacity as a member of that particular university. Many of the funders, because when that 5 million comes, it's not going to come into your personal bank account. It's going to come into the institutional account. And therefore, the institution also needs to have a say or give a thumbs up for the application. Many of the funders would say, okay, we need endorsement from the institution, because that also gives us the surety that the institution is in support of this application, and that the institution will be able to assist the management and auditing of this money as it comes, right? And again, I go back to the first point, you cannot do this if you wait for the last minute. And most, if not all the times, the signature or signatures that are required are the signatures of people in senior management within the institution. And as we all know, these are people who are very busy in meetings, traveling, their schedules are very busy. So chances are you submit something, you need to wait, turn around of 48 hours. So obviously, if you wait for the last minute, this is not going to work out for you. Finish early, making sure that you're giving enough time for the signatories to also append their signatures, or to have questions if they have questions of clarity or whatever it is that they might want to ask before they approve or endorse your application. So if you've given them at least a week, you know that even if it takes 2 or 3 days for the documents to come back to you, you are still safe. Okay, so it's very, very important. And all of this in this slide that I've spoken about is around the issue of time. All of these points are around the issue of time, that if you manage your time very well, all of these other things will fall into place. Some mistakes that applicants make, things that to take into consideration as you work or consider your own application. What we've just spoken about, not allowing enough time for submission of your application, not reading the application package in its entirety, and finding that you've put together a beautiful application, yes, but there's that one point or one thing or two things that were mentioned in the application package that you did not give attention to. And as a result, wonderful as your application can be, it's not going to succeed because you missed out on a point or two or three. So if you read the application package, you make sure that you are safe and you've attended to everything that the funder has put on the application package. If you don't follow formatting guidelines, if they request that the budget should be structured in this particular way, this is how you need to structure it. The activities, this is how you need to outline your activities, indicating or paying attention to 1, 2, and 3 issues. So you don't just name your activities, but you also need to highlight these specific things, because those specific things are important for the funder to be able to determine whether to fund you or not. So guidelines also very important, and often they'll be found in the application package. And then not getting the required signatures on required forms. Sometimes you're like, oh my goodness, it's due today and I didn't get to get the signatures. Let me just submit, and we'll see what happens. Don't submit and say you'll see what happens. What's going to happen is that you're not going to get the funding. So make sure that you have everything that is required in place before you submit. And then, of course, failing to proofread. That is a common mistake. And many reviewers don't like it very much. So you might lose out on 5 million because you did not proofread. You don't want that. And then some of the questions based on previous grant applications and people who've gone through the process and have then, as a result, learned certain things, or maybe the questions that people often ask, so that frequently asked questions that we think maybe might be critical for you to consider, to think about. The deadline date, is it clear? Is it there? And again, as I said, sometimes it's just the date, but sometimes it's the date and the time. So if it's the date, then okay, maybe I have until midnight, or maybe you have until closing of business on that day of submission. If you are unclear, this is something to follow up on. And are you an eligible applicant? Sometimes, because you are still a student and you are applying as a student of UNISA, busy with your master's, your PhD, some funders would require that you get the permission of your supervisor, or the supervisor applies on your behalf, or the supervisor signs. So, or they may say you are not eligible to apply on your own as a student. And then you can have a conversation with the supervisor saying, I've identified this. I think it's aligned to what I want to do. I think I'll benefit in this way. It will allow me to have funding to attend conferences, to do this, to do that. But as a student, I'm not eligible. So can you, as the supervisor, perhaps consider working with me on this, right? So are you eligible? You don't want to spend a lot of time applying for something that you don't even qualify for. Can you sign the forms, or are there other signatures required? Can I send some of the package after the deadline date? So maybe you have some of the things ready, but not everything. And you decide the due date is today. Let me send what I have so that at least they have my things with them, or some of the things that are required with them. And then I can send the rest the following day. That's called an incomplete application. And if it's incomplete, then it means you did not meet the requirement. So you cannot send some of the package after the deadline date, right? Sometimes you might be waiting for a document. Maybe they say, okay, we need your qualification to say that you qualify, because maybe they're saying only people with PhDs can apply. And you know that you've passed, your things are in place, but you don't have your qualification yet. And then you can check. This is when you write an email and you ask, and you also check with the university, by when will you get your papers? And then you can say, can I send everything? And maybe get the university to write a letter that you can submit instead, indicating that indeed this person has completed, that their qualification will be received in due course. Check, follow up. These are important things, right? I know, for example, when people apply for postdoctoral fellowship, some, they know that they're finishing this year, their work, they're busy maybe doing corrections, but they've passed already, or they've been informed that they've passed. But when you apply for a postdoctoral fellowship, because also you are chasing due dates, deadlines, and say, I would like to apply, even though maybe I don't have the final papers, you check with the competition manager or a person who's in charge of the application and say, this is my situation right now. Am I eligible? What is it that you would need from me as proof that I have indeed completed, even though I don't have my papers in place? So that's what you can do. And then you also want to know, okay, maybe I'm still waiting for the examiner's feedback. Of course, I'm hoping to pass, but you never know, right? So, and the due date is coming very soon, so you might miss the deadline. And you want to know whether it's an annual grant so that you can start already preparing for next year's call. And you've got enough time to be able to do that so that you prepare yourself. So you can find out and say, okay, because I am not eligible this year, but I know that next year I'm going to be eligible based on the criteria. There's just one or two things that are not in place for me at the moment. Can I then apply next year? Will the call be out next year? Then you know, then you plan ahead. That's very important. Will the deadline be extended? That way you know, should I just give up? Or maybe they're going to extend by a week or 2 weeks, depending. Is there such a possibility? Find out, right? And then also when you've submitted, you want to know, are you going to wait for a month, 2 months? How long does it often take? Is it something that they can assist you with so that you know how to plan your things as well? What happens next after I submit my proposal? Do I then just wait? Any indication of how long I would need to wait? So that's also very important to think about. So as I move towards ending for tonight, I thought I could just give you an example of the call for grant proposal. So I've spoken about all these things and what needs to be in place. So what does this look like if we were to go on Google right now and check? And I found this example that I thought encapsulates the things that I was talking about. So this is the Infinity Foundation, right? And the call then goes, the foundation is calling for project proposals to do research or develop educational materials, and then they indicate what the objective is and what they want to achieve with this and what the project should focus on. This project will result in one or more of the following. So books, curriculum development, articles, conferences. Already you have an idea that, okay, as I develop my grant, what is it that I think I would like to do? I may be interested in AI, IT things. Okay, so there's digital slideshows. There is audio, video materials that I can develop as a result of this project. So what are the concrete things that you're going to do? So you're going to maybe write a book based on the findings, the work that you've done, or you're thinking maybe in the teaching space, how what you've done can inform the rethinking in curriculum development as one thinks about the work around Indic traditions in the educational system, right? So the portrayal of Indic traditions, that is what the priority of this call is, the focus of this call is. And then you pay attention to that, and then the outcome would be one or two or some of these outputs, right? And then they also indicate that, yes, the broader focus is on Indic traditions in the educational system. But within this, we're interested in history. We're interested in Indic traditions as it relates to religion, as it relates to art and sociology, as it relates to philosophy. So as you can see, this is very interdisciplinary, it's multidisciplinary. So if you're coming from history, if you're coming from art, if you're coming from theology, religion, for example, there's a space for you. So it's multidisciplinary in that sense. So there's actually a broad broad options for you as the researcher when it comes to applying here. And then it goes on to then indicate why this is important, giving a bit of an overview, which then assists you to say, okay, this is aligned to my own interest. This is aligned to what I've been curious about, my own interest. Maybe I want to build on what I'm already doing. So this fund would assist me to be able to build on this work that I'm doing, right? And then they go on to indicate that while the fund will consider all proposals, right, they are going to pay specific or particular attention to these specific issues. And you'll see there's quite a number of them. Again, it's quite broad, right? So you'll see that as you apply for a grant, and again here you'll see a lot of text, read everything, right? So you'll see all these points here. So the different focus areas that you can consider if you were to apply for a grant. So which one speaks to you, right? The contributions to modern psychology, right? To language and linguistics, to social conditions, issues of gender, poverty, pollution, right? So this is one of the most broadest call that I've actually come across, and it really opens up to you as the researcher to find yourself in this call, and then to be able to work and carve a proposal in line with your specific niche area, but at the same time responding to the overall focus of what the funder wants, right? So it's about indie traditions, but from a psychological perspective, right? From a gendered perspective, in how these traditions also link to issues of climate and pollution and the implications. So all of these, how do you then carve a proposal that's aligned to one or two or a number of these? In media portrayals, how are these traditions portrayed? Is it problematic? How can we rethink? How can we do things differently? What is your work going to focus on, and what is the contribution of that work? And you'll see it continues. So there's like 3 slides focusing on this grant call. And make sure that you read each and everything so that at the end you can say, okay, this makes sense. And this call also speaks and it's appealing to the kind of work that I'm doing. And then they go on to indicate, as you submit your application, this is what we would like you to submit. And again, here, they don't want a lot of things, right? It's a detailed CV, a typed proposal, right? Which is about 2 to 5 pages. And here again, if you remember, when we go back to that point of being clear and being concise and being specific, think about what can you say in 2 pages, right? What can you say in 5 pages that covers everything? That covers everything that will assist the reviewer to get a clear indication of what you want to do, what you want to achieve. Can you say that in 3 pages, right? So in these 2 to 5 pages, you have to detail what is to be accomplished. You have to detail the methodology. You have to detail the time that you're going to require for the completion of the work. So you offer a time frame over 3 years or over 2 years or over 5 years, depending how long the project is going to be. And then you also need to detail the budget. So they also want to know about the amount of funding that you are requesting. All of this in 5 pages, right? So you really need to sit and apply your mind as you apply for funding, where they want you to say all of these things in 2 to 5 pages. There's an example I heard from someone, and I thought this is very powerful. It was actually drawing from one of the known scholars or philosophers whose name escapes me now, but he said, I'm writing you this long letter. Pardon me. Yes, pardon me for this long letter. So the letter was long. It went on for pages and pages saying the things that he was saying. And then he goes on to ask for forgiveness and say, pardon me for writing you this long letter. When I have more time, or if I had more time, I would write you a shorter one. So for you to be able to write a good proposal in 3 pages, covering all of these things that I mentioned here, is going to require you to really sit and apply your mind and decide, what do I include? What do I exclude? Under methodology, what parts or aspects of methodology am I going to foreground? And by foregrounding this particular aspect of the methodology, it will give the reader an understanding of what or how I intend to do this work, right? So that really requires you to apply your mind. Because if you've got 20 pages, you can even give us the background of the methodology that you want to do and why it's important to do it that way. Because you have all this space. Now you go and tell things that are sometimes not necessary to tell us. But when you've got limited time, it's difficult. It's really difficult. So here again is really something to think about. And then you'll see there, the call then also gives the details of the funder, where they are based, where you would need to post if you want to post, where you can mail. You can see this is quite an old application because they're still talking about fax. I think many of us don't use faxes anymore. And then the phone number in case maybe you have questions as you're busy working on your application and you are unclear on certain things, then you can call them, right? And then the final part, it says, so that your grant does not get lost, because maybe they receive a lot of emails or a lot of mail. If you're mailing it, snail mail, then it has to indicate grant proposal so that they know which department to send it to. You also don't want your proposal to get lost. Okay, and then they go on there. This is again one of those very generous ones. There's no deadline for submission. So I think as and when submissions come and there's funding available, they review, and then if they are happy, then they give you the funding. Okay, and then they offer information, again, on the criteria that will be followed. We've spoken about criteria. So again, this criteria already tells you, do I qualify or don't I qualify, right? A grantee must be a scholar, a teacher, visionary or spiritual leader. Are you any of those? If you are, okay, you qualify to apply. If you're not, then no, don't apply. So there's the criteria that will assist you to be able to say, okay, this is what they're looking for. Am I there in terms of what they're looking for? Am I not? Right? And then lastly, before I pause and open up for conversations and questions, there's also what we call the logic model. And I'd like you to think about the logic model as you contemplate or think about your grant proposal or grant application. And logic models are what is often called the Swiss Army knife of the grant life cycle. So for each and every step for the 5 years from the beginning of the project, there are all these different aspects, right? You know, the Army knife has got different things. There's all these things as you look at them in the picture, and they all serve different purposes, right? And as you look at them, then you know which one falls where, which one comes in handy when what is needed. So they provide a clear framework That both streamlines your proposal development and makes it easy for evaluators to understand. You know where the knife is, you know where the scissors are, and what is the role, the purpose of the scissors. So each component has got its function. However, all the components are interconnected. So they're interconnected, all forming one part of this knife. But you know, when you open it, there are all these different components to it. Okay, so there has to be logic in terms of the framework, the framing of the work that you're doing. And there has to be a clear relationship between the different parts forming a whole. Apologies for the spelling error there. Forming a whole. So it shows the relationship among the resources that you have, or the resources that you need to operate your program. What is it that you need? You need research assistants. You need equipment for your work. You need money to travel, to go into the field, or to go meet with collaborators. You need money for transcription. You need money to go and present your work, or the preliminary findings and get feedback, right? So all of these things are interconnected, because the feedback will assist you with the second phase of the work. There's piloting maybe that's needed. So the activities that you plan to do, does one lead to the next logically? Is one connected to the next? And all the way to the results that you hope to achieve. And all these different steps, are they logically leading you to the steps that you want to achieve? So what is it that needs to be in place for you to be able to achieve all of these, right? So what are the parts? The parts of the Swiss knife, the parts of the logic model. First is what you're going to put in, you as the researcher, you as the PI, you as the research team. So what you're putting in is the resources. What you need is the resources that are going to be needed and that are going to be consumed by the program, right? So staff time. If you are a member of staff and you're going to be doing this project, is there a need maybe for you to be given a sabbatical or to be given some time off so that you can focus on the research? If the answer is yes, then that also means you need to consider maybe staff replacement. So when it comes to your budgeting, this is something that you would need to add into your budgeting as well. So staff time, the equipment that you're going to need, the supplies that you're going to need, all of these things are what's needed for the program to be able to happen, right? So this is what needs to come in. So this is the inputs, what you're putting in, what needs to be put in, where the money is going to go. And then following that is the activities, right? The activities explain what your program will do to get these results. You need the equipment so that you can be able to run the experiments, so that you can be able to work in the lab to do the work that you need to do. Right, you need the funding, or the activities that you're going to be doing require you to go out into the field. How are you going to get there? So what is it that the program is going to do to get the results? And then at the end of that, what is it that you're hoping to get out? So what are the outputs? And these are measurable program activities. Many of the big grants want to see how the activities have brought about change, how this research has brought about change. So the number of participants served, you managed to reach so many people, you managed to do experiments where now you found out that if this is done, the results can be this. If we work on a particular experiment and we do the work, this is one of the ways that maybe we can reduce pollution in the water and make sure that we have quality water with quality and water that is safe for people, right? So that's something that's measurable, that over time we've done and we've run this experiment. This is what we did. So it's measurable in that the activities have led to this. And then the outcomes, so the benefits for your program, we have now clean water as a result of your work. You're contributing to ensuring that people have got clean, quality drinking water. This continues to be a challenge that we have, I believe, not only in South Africa, in many other countries as well. There are some countries that I've visited where you can only drink bottled water. And so the benefit that the program, your work, will bring to the community, to society, to our understanding of things. Okay, and then lastly, the last slide. This is just a sample of how you can think about planning your project from what is it that you're going to input in the beginning. So you're going to need stuff. You're going to need research assistants. You're going to need people that you're going to be working with. You're going to need resources for you to be able to do the work, right? So here is the logic model. So when you think about the topic of your research that you want to do, so in this case, we're looking at comprehensive parent education and support initiative. You've identified that in a particular community or in some communities, there is a challenge when it comes to the relationship and the support that the schools are getting from the parents. So what role can the parents play, and how would that benefit the quality of education for their children in the school when things are not only left to the teachers, right? So you want to say, what is it that can be put in place to equip parents so that they can be active in the education of their children, right? So there, okay, it's the staff, it's the money, and it's the partners that you're going to be working with, and then the research that needs to happen. Then, okay, so what is it that's needed, that needs to be done? How do you develop a program that's going to assist? And you can see this is very much clear in terms of straightforward. What is it that you want to achieve? During a country needs assessment, majority of parents reported that they were having difficulty parenting and felt stressed as a result. So how do you want to help the parents? Maybe develop a parent-ed curriculum. Some of the challenges that we're having in society right now, and parents just feeling out of their depth in terms of engaging and parenting their children that are sometimes, you know, parented by their peers or the social media. How can parents learn skills that can assist them in parenting? What kind of guidelines can be useful? We know there really isn't an answer that can be an answer for all, but what are some of the things that can be put in place to assist, right? So you want to develop a curriculum. So you deliver a series of interactive sessions. You understood what the issues and the challenges are, and then you create and facilitate a support group. And all of this is so that the parents can be able to be equipped, right? And respond to this issue of the difficulty in parenting. And what you're hoping to get at the end, the outcome, is that the parents will have an increased knowledge of child development. They will better understand their own parenting style and be able to decipher whether, you know, it's useful or not, or how they can better equip themselves over and above what they've been doing, or change some of the styles that are maybe not helpful. They gain skills in effective parenting practices. And working with the parents, there's identification of appropriate actions that could be taken. And then they use these parenting practices, and you can follow up, you can evaluate, you can have other sessions to check whether there's been an improvement in child-parent relations. Have they seen anything? Have they experienced anything? And at the end of the day, the whole aim is that if we've got good families where parents understand their children, children understand the parents, and the relationships are healthy, then that also contributes to strong families. And as we know, strong families equal or build or contribute towards strong societies. And when we're looking at a societal issue, we need to understand that societies are made up of communities, families, individuals within those spaces. So when you start giving attention to the family, then you're also giving attention to the broader society in some ways. So as you think about your work and its contribution, these are some of the ways in which you can think about it. Of course, it might differ depending on the focus of the work that you're doing, but this is just an idea in terms of how you can think about the possibility of the outcomes of your work, the contributions of your work, and how you can make this clear in your grant application, in how you want to communicate with the reviewers, with the funder, to increase your chances of getting funding. And I will pause here and go back. And then open up for questions. On some of your comments in terms of where you are, whether you've thought about applying for funding, or whether you have just been, you have applied for funding and maybe there had been some challenges along the way. What are those challenges? And maybe then we can talk about that a little bit. Good evening, Fretel. How does grant funding bolster the resume of a young scholar? Very good question. If you have had grant funding, it really contributes positively towards your resume or your CV as a scholar. It, again, already speaks to the fact that your work has been reviewed by others who then deemed your work as being of good quality, that they offered and they trusted you with the money that they have, right? So it's you can never go wrong when applying for funding, because it's going to be very positive for you, for your CV, going forward as an academic, as a scholar. So as an emerging scholar, this is something that will definitely go a long way. If you're based in South Africa, for example, when you apply for the NRF rating, where you get recognition as a scholar, this is one of the things that would count towards that. So let's say you've completed your PhD, and with the NRF, they're always looking at emerging scholars who are on their way up, and then scholars who are established, and there are different categories for this. So there's one that's specific for young scholars as a way to encourage you to continue building yourself as an academic. And it works later on. Let's say as an emerging scholar, you get 500,000 Rand or 200,000 Rand, but there's already a show that there's potential in terms of the work that you're doing, but also the quality of the work that you're doing, that you have potential to actually get 1 million next time or get 3 million next time. So you can also then be considered for rating as someone who shows potential to actually make it as a researcher, but to also contribute in the research field more broadly, but specifically in the building of your discipline in particular. So it's a very positive thing to have on your CV, and it contributes immensely. I always say sometimes I think some funders are a bit lazy because they also put a lot of weight to checking what is it that you have been awarded or achieved before applying to their funding. Some of them actually include in their core or the criteria or the application form, there'll be a section where they ask you, have you received a grant before? Have you had any grants before? Have you received any award before? You know, and they don't ask that for the sake of asking. They ask that because it actually counts. It's important. So if you can answer that in that application and say, yes, I've actually held a grant, a what grant before, just mentioning that, or even maybe indicating the value if they ask for the value, that works positively towards your advancement as a scholar. So it's never too early. I guess it's my simple answer. It's never too early. It works very positively. It's an advantage for you as a scholar. So I would encourage you that should you identify a grant, go for it. Go for it. And then a follow-on question, do universities take into consideration grant funding projects into consideration when they're promoting their staff members? Yes, yes, I can say that for UNISA. I can say that for all the other sister institutions in South Africa, all 26 of them. I know that for a fact that it counts. It counts. If you have been a grant recipient, it does count. For some, it may not necessarily lead you to not being promoted if you don't have any grant funding. For some institutions, it's a criteria, especially for higher positions, that you've been in academia for all these years, you've taught for all these years, you've done research for all these years, but you've always just been dependent on your institution to support you. What is it that you've done as a researcher to advance yourself and to capacitate others? And grant funding assists towards that. So it really acts as a positive attribute for you, or a positive addition for you as a scholar. So you're asking promotion to senior lecturer, associate professor, or full professorship. Yes, especially when you're going to higher ranks, like your associate and full professorship. It's very, very important. So you might also want to be maybe a research professor. You are working maybe in a research intensive university, because universities are not the same. So the requirement and the strictness of it is also linked to what is it that you've brought in for the university. Because you getting a grant, number one, it means that the university does not have to worry about providing funding for you to do your work. So you are almost unburdening the university a little bit so that they can redirect the money to someone else, or to emerging scholars, your junior lecturers or your lecturers, because you have your own grant. But also, it's important because as an associate professor or full professor, you are supervising students, you're supervising masters, you're supervising doctoral students. And part of applying for grants is that you're also contributing towards capacity building. And what this means is that if I have a grant, if I have this 3 million, part of the budgeting that I'm going to do is that I'm going to say, I'm going to work with, or I'm going to fund 2 doctoral students, or rather I'm going to graduate 2 doctoral students and maybe 2 master's students. So there's 4 students that are going to benefit from this grant. So these students automatically, it means they don't have to worry about their fees, because your grant is going to pay for their fees. So the students can then just focus on their work. But of course, the students' work would need to be aligned to the topic that you're going to be working on, right? Because at the end of the day, when you apply for a grant, as I said, the theme and everything around that theme has to be linked to what the funder wants. And therefore the same with the students, that now there's knowledge production on this field over and above me producing a book or research articles as a scholar. There's also knowledge production in dissertations and theses that are going to come out from the students that I would have supported. So some universities are more strict than others. Others are not so strict because they focus more on tuition, teaching and learning. And then they also focus on your own outputs and contribution in the field in that way. Some institutions are very particular and specific in saying that it is a requirement, because we are expecting that as a professor, you are also bringing in money. And remember, when we're talking about journals, it's also about the ranking of universities, and grants contribute immensely to university rankings as well. That this university has succeeded in attracting 50 million rands, right? Because I got a grant for 5 million, my colleague got a grant for 3 million, the other 3 colleagues also got a grant. So as an institution, in 2023, UNISA managed to get 50 million from grants. So when it comes to university rankings and things like that, these are some of the things that get considered as well. That this university is sustainable. We're not only relying on what we're getting from the government in our own reserves, but we're actually contributing actively to ensuring that we are sustainable, but to also ensuring that our students don't have to worry about paying their fees. They can focus on their studies. Already at multiple levels, getting a grant is useful. And again, depending on what grant, how much is the grant, that also contributes as well. Like, it is a known fact that a certain funder or a certain grant is not very easy to get, but here's this scholar at UNISA that managed to get 10 million from that funder, right? And so that also then contributes. And of course, this is something I would highlight when I go for my promotion interview, because there would be questions there that in the last 3 years, in the last 5 years, have you received any awards? Do you have any grants? So it's there. So whether there's going to be criteria in terms of putting that there, or that's going to be an edit, because there are things that are required and there are things that are not required, but then that will be advantageous to have. So it will increase your chances of being promoted if you've brought 20 million to the university in the past 5 years or so. So that's how it usually works, Fritel. Many universities do consider grant funding when it comes to promotion. Okay. I'm not seeing any more questions. Should I take it that everything was clear, or should I take it that you're still absorbing? But yeah, I don't see any more questions. And so in the absence of questions, I just want to say, as I've indicated at the beginning, that this is one of 3 sessions on grant writing. So this was just the introduction in terms of thinking about the application process, criteria, what you need to keep in mind, the model, how to structure things. And then we're going to go into the content of what a grant actually looks like. How do you actually work with the budget? How do you actually work with the actual proposal? And you'll see again some similarities with some of the work that we've done. But now, obviously, the focus would be on getting somebody to give you money, right? You're not just writing a proposal to pass your M or your D, but you're writing it because you want money. So the way in which you carve it would be slightly different, but you'll see there's a lot of similarities in terms of the content of what you need to focus on. So I think it will be beneficial both for the grant, but also for some of the other work that you might be busy with as well. So we're going to have 2 more sessions next week on the 26th and the 27th. And I hope that you'll be there for those so that we can have a continuation. And if you maybe after this session go and watch the video of tonight's session or look at the presentation, and then something sparks your curiosity or a question comes to mind, please note it down. And then next week when we come together again, then you can raise that question. You also would have noted that on the 28th, we were supposed to have another session that was meant to be a space for you to ask questions based on these 3 sessions that we would have had tonight and the 2 next week, questions that you would have had. So a dedicated session where you can ask questions on grant writing. But what we have decided to do is that with the 2 sessions next week, the questions that you would have, we will cover them in those 2 sessions. Hence, I say for tonight, if maybe there are questions that come up in the next couple of days, please bring them to the next session. And then we will have a 3rd session again, where we can also cover more questions that you might be having. So please note, and I think an announcement will also be made officially, but for you who are with us tonight, please note that the session on the 28th will no longer be taking place. All right. And I was saying that to also give you the opportunity to maybe ask more questions if you have any, but I see that there are no more questions. And in the absence of additional questions, I guess we can call it a day. We can call it a night. Please enjoy your evening or enjoy your afternoon until we meet again in the next session. Goodbye, everybody.